Opening the center creates immediate possibilities for pawn advances and piece development. Developing the knight to its most active square immediately contests the center and prepares for rapid pawn breaks. Immediately establishing central pawn presence, c4 contests the d5 square and prepares to expand on the queen side. Initiating the fianchetto aims to control the long diagonal, though it potentially weakens kingside defenses later. Developing the knight to c3 fortifies the d4 pawn and prepares for kingside castling while maintaining flexibility. Developing the bishop to g7 locks in this pawn structure and prepares for kingside castling, a solid positional choice. Solidifying the center, white dares black to challenge the e4 pawn and claim space in the ensuing tactical dance. Solidifying the center's pawn structure, this move prepares to contest control of the d-file and supports a potential e5 pawn advance later. Opening lines for kingside development, preparing a fianchetto, promises a comfortable positional game by solidifying the center. Securing the monarch in the king's corner offers immediate safety and prepares for a central pawn push. Developing the bishop to target black's fianchettoed king's side, this establishes a potent attacking diagonal. Reinforcing the center with the knight establishes a solid pawn structure and prepares for potential kingside expansion. Developing the knight towards the center prepares for a potential kingside attack and supports the central pawn structure. Instantly challenging white's central pawn structure, black aggressively fights for space and initiative. Securing the king amidst the developing central storm offers immediate safety and prepares for potential pawn pushes. Exchanging pawns on d4 simplifies the center, aiming to open lines for black's pieces and potentially create an isolated pawn for white later. Reclaiming the center with the knight solidifies white's central pawn structure, eyeing the e6 square and restricting black's pieces. Knight sprints to the center, seeking to disrupt white's pawn structure and establish an outpost. Securing the queen side, white prepares to potentially expand on that flank while reinforcing the central pawn structure. Positioning the bishop here secures its diagonal and prepares for potential pawn advances on the queen side, a sound developmental step. Developing the bishop to an active diagonal targets black's kingside pawn structure and prepares for potential queenside pressure. Developing the knight to c6 solidifies black's central presence and prepares for potential advances on the queen side, while also challenging white's control of the d4 square. Asserting control of the central d5 outpost with the knight introduces significant tactical and positional pressure, potentially disrupting black's pawn structure. Exchanges often simplify positions, and here black readily trades off white's central knight, opening lines for potential counterplay. Unlocking the d-file offers tantalizing attacking possibilities against black's kingside. Recapturing the knight immediately aims to simplify, though it surrenders central pawn control, opening diagonals for white's bishops. Recapturing with the bishop solidifies the center and opens the c-file for potential future action. Expanding on the queen side offers dynamic counterplay, aiming to open lines against white's potentially passive structure. Trading off black's strong fianchettoed bishop simplifies the position, potentially opening lines for white's rooks while diminishing black's kingside attacking potential. Relocating the king to the g7 square stabilizes the pawn structure and prepares for potential central pawn advances, while simultaneously securing the monarch from immediate threats. Unleashing a forceful queen check, white immediately disrupts black's rook's new sanctuary, aiming to exploit the temporarily exposed monarch. Returning the king to a safer square on g8 relinquishes the central outpost for the knight, but consolidates black's defensive posture, awaiting white's next initiative. Exposing the queen's new home on g8 suddenly reveals a vulnerability that white's pawn push aims to exploit immediately. Recapturing the pawn opens a vital diagonal for your queen and aims to exploit the slightly awkward placement of white's monarch. Re-establishing central presence and preparing to potentially target black's slightly exposed king. Shifting the queen activates this piece and prepares to contest the central files. Repositioning the rook to the third rank aims to support the central pawn push and activate this piece, potentially pressuring black's kingside. Initiating a pawn storm on the kingside to disrupt white's monarch and gain attacking initiative. Probing the dark squares, this pawn push aims to disrupt black's queenside structure and potentially isolate their pieces. Challenging the queenside pressure, this maneuver prepares to exchange bishops and simplify the position, potentially opening lines for the rook. Repositioning the rook to the central file aims to challenge black's pawn structure and pressure the d-pawn. Preparing to challenge white's control of the e-file and potentially disrupt their queenside structure. Expanding the queenside pawns probes weaknesses in black's pawn structure. Re-establishing the bishop's influence on the queenside diagonal offers excellent counterplay. Pushing this pawn injects new life into the queenside pawn structure, aiming to disrupt black's bishop and create overextended lines. Contesting central pawn control, black aims to disrupt white's queenside expansion and activate their rook. Pushing this pawn now aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and gain outpost squares. A pivotal moment arises as black anchors their rook to contest the open c-file, aiming to disrupt white's pawn advances and prepare counterplay. Pushing the pawn aggressively seeks to lock down the queenside pawn structure and gain crucial space. Securing the c-file with the rook aims to disrupt white's queenside pawn structure and potentially launch a counterattack. Activating the rook along the third rank, aiming to wrestle for control of the central files and prepare for pawn advances. Sacrificing material to open lines against the king is a bold, but potentially dangerous gamble here. The queen's repositioning aims to solidify central control and potentially target weaknesses on the kingside, initiating a positional squeeze. Preparing the f-pawns advance to contest the open file and generate counterplay against white's queenside pawn structure. Seeking to redeploy your queen for better control of the central open files. Unblocking the e-file opens a dynamic route for the rook, seeking active squares and potentially challenging white's central control. Securing the c-file offers white improved maneuvering and central influence. Sealing the c-file provides desperately needed counterplay, challenging white's central control. Simplifying exchanges to secure the open file for rook dominance. Gaining the open c-file offers a vital strategic advantage, potentially pressuring the weakened queenside pawn structure. Unveiling a deadly discovered attack, this queen sacrifice forces a king scramble, exposing vulnerable pawns. A necessary liquidation of attacking potential, ushering in a decidedly simplified endgame. Transitioning into a simplified endgame, this pawn push aggressively claims space and prepares to support a passed pawn advance. The black monarch steps out, seeking active squares and potentially preparing to contest the central open file. A pawn's determined march, seizing initiative and restricting black's pieces. Sacrificing the bishop in this endgame transition aims to activate the king and create passed pawn potential, albeit with a slight positional concession. Capturing that bishop solidifies your material advantage and prepares for a decisive endgame push. Shifting the king towards the center is crucial for activating him in this stark pawn endgame. Capturing that pawn consolidates a passed b-pawn, the key to victory here. The king's newfound activity is a double-edged sword, demanding careful calculation in this exposed position. Dominating the knight outpost secures a critical advantage.